Imagine you save a man from a brutal blizzard. He tells you he's paralyzed, left for dead by his fiancée. You use every last bit of your compassion to care for him. Your loyal dog, Cooper, after days of suspicion, finally trusts the helpless man and lays his head down in comfort. That trust breaks through your final defenses. And then, at 3 a.m, you wake up. You see the man you believed was paralyzed standing in your kitchen, stretching calmly as if nothing is wrong. The lie is exposed. But that isn't all. As dawn breaks, the sound of a private black helicopter echoes through the valley as it lands right in your yard. You realize the man you saved is hiding a secret far bigger than the lie. The sky over the Keweenaw Peninsula had vanished, erased by a suffocating wall of gray. It was not yet 4 p.m, but the world was already dying, the light swallowed whole by the coming storm. Sarah Jenkins stood on the porch of her cabin, watching the world disappear. The cold was a familiar ache, but it couldn't touch the deeper, permanent chill she'd carried for 2 years, ever since David's accident had stolen her future and left her in this isolated silence. She was a woman in her late 30s, with hands that were strong and capable and eyes that had seen too much. She was a former combat nurse. This solitude was the only prescription that had ever worked. A warm, solid body pressed against her leg. Cooper. He was a 4-year-old husky mix, a striking creature of wolf gray and white, with one eye the color of ice and the other a deep, soulful brown. He was intelligent, but more than that, he was her barometer, an anchor of simple, living warmth in a life otherwise frozen by loss. "Just the woodshed latch, Coop," she murmured, her breath a white plume. "Then we're in for the night. It's going to be a bad one." She crunched through the snow, which was already calf-deep and getting deeper by the minute. She was checking the heavy wooden latch, a simple final chore before the world shut down, when Cooper went rigid. It wasn't a warning growl at a squirrel. It was a dead-still silence. His head snapped toward the dense woods, his ears locked forward. "Cooper, what is it?" He launched himself from her side, a gray and white streak against the darkening trees. A bark cut through the rising howl of the wind, not a territorial challenge, but a desperate, frantic summons. "Cooper, heel!" The command was sharp, absolute. He ignored it. That's what terrified her. Cooper never ignored that command. He barked again, a piercing sound that was being swallowed by the snow. The dread that hit her was immediate, colder than the wind. She ran, plunging into the drifts after him. She found him on a steep, hidden slope, digging furiously at the base of a drift near an overturned snowmobile, snow flying from his paws. "What is it, boy? What did you find?" The wind paused, and in the sudden, terrible silence, she heard it. A human sound, a low, gasping moan. Oh, no. She was on her knees beside the dog, tearing at the packed snow with her gloved hands. She found a man. He was half buried, his face a waxy, pale color she knew too well. His clothes were expensive, stylish, and utterly useless against the brutal reality of a Michigan whiteout. His eyes fluttered open, struggling to focus on her. "Mark," he whispered, his teeth chattering. "Mark, I'm Sarah. What happened?" "Fiancée, Chloe." He shivered, a violent, full-body spasm. "We argued? She pushed me. I fell." "Hit that rock," he gestured weakly. I can't feel my legs." He choked on the words, his eyes wide with a vacant horror. "Sarah, I can't feel anything." The words cut through the storm. They were a trigger. In one cold second, the grieving widow on the porch vanished. The combat nurse took command. The part of her that was frozen by grief was instantly eclipsed by the part of her forged in crisis. "Don't move, Mark. Don't try to move at all." Her voice was a different instrument, calm, cold, absolute. "My name is Sarah. I'm a nurse. I'm getting you out of here." The cabin had shrunk. What was once Sarah's sanctuary had become a cramped makeshift clinic, besieged by the constant high-pitched scream of the wind. The air inside was thick with tension, smelling of wood smoke, antiseptic, and the unfamiliar scent of the stranger. Sarah moved with the cold, automated efficiency that had saved lives in field hospitals. It was a shield she wore as comfortably as her own skin. She had immobilized Mark on the living room couch, which now served as a hospital bed. "I'm checking for sensation again," she stated, not asked, her voice clipped. She unwrapped a sterile medical pin from her kit. "Tell me if you feel this. Here?" "No," Mark replied, his voice barely a whisper. "Here?" She traced a line along his ankle. "Nothing?" His answers were consistent, his numbness absolute from the waist down. There was no gross deformity, no obvious sign of a break, but as a nurse, she was trained to trust her patient's report. You treated the man, not just the injury. Cooper, however, was not bound by medical ethics. He was bound by loyalty. He had established a post by the hearth, a gray and white judge. He lay with his head on his paws, but he was not asleep. His eyes, one ice blue, one warm brown, were open, unblinking. When Mark shifted his shoulders or sighed, a low subsonic rumble would vibrate in Cooper's chest, a warning of pure, protective instinct. He was guarding Sarah, but he was also guarding the fragile piece of the home her grief had built. The storm raged for 2 more days, locking them in. Mark was a quiet patient. He barely touched the broth she offered. He spent hours staring at the window, not at the snow, but at the white, empty void, his expression one of hollow, profound despair. He would flinch slightly when a gust of wind hit the glass, as if the sound were a physical blow. Cooper watched him. The dog, tuned to a frequency beyond human understanding, did not comprehend paralysis. But he understood despair. He recognized the scent of it. It was the same hollow, crushing ache that clung to Sarah in her darkest moments. It was on the 3rd afternoon that the stalemate broke. Cooper stood, stretched his long body, and let out a soft, questioning whine. He walked slowly from the hearth. Sarah tensed, her hand ready to grab his collar. "Cooper, stay!" The dog paused, looked back at her, then turned and continued, his claws making a soft clicking sound on the wood floor. He stopped beside the couch. Mark turned his head, his eyes wide with a flicker of fear. Cooper simply sniffed the still hand hanging over the edge. He nudged his cold, wet nose against Mark's listless fingers. Then, with a long, heavy sigh that seemed to drain the tension from the room, he lay down on the floor and rested his heavy head on the edge of the couch cushion. It was not a plea for attention. It was a gesture of shared sorrow. Sarah's breath caught in her throat. The dog's trust was a verdict, and it shamed her own suspicion. She looked at Mark, really looked at him, not as a set of symptoms, but as a man trapped on her sofa, helpless. Without a word, she went to the back bedroom. There was the sound of scraping and a squeak of old wheels. She returned, rolling a battered, high-backed office chair. "It's not much," she said, her voice suddenly rough, the clinical edge filed away. She had reinforced the base and oiled the wheels as best she could. "But the arms are sturdy. It should let you get to the window. Or the bathroom." He stared at the chair, then at her, his eyes unreadable. "Thank you," he whispered. Sarah hesitated, the quiet act of service cracking her own armor. She found herself speaking to fill the silence. "David, my husband. He bought that chair for his workshop." She looked away, toward the fire. He left a mortgage on this place. I know what it feels like to be trapped." It was long after midnight when the sound pulled Sarah from a shallow, restless sleep. It was not the wind and not the settling of the old cabin. It was a soft, sharp click, the sound of a glass being placed on the kitchen counter. Her eyes snapped open in the darkness. She was instantly awake, every nerve alive. She looked down. Cooper was still a heavy, warm lump at the foot of her bed, not the dog. She slipped from the blankets, her bare feet silent on the cold wood floor. Her heart hammered a painful rhythm against her ribs. She moved like a shadow to the bedroom doorway and peered into the main room. The fire had burned down to a faint red glow. And in that dim light, she saw him. Mark was standing. He was not on the couch. He was not in the office chair she had retrofitted. He was standing by the window, his back to her, stretching his arms over his head like a man waking from a long, comfortable rest. He was perfectly, completely fine. The air left Sarah's lungs in a silent rush. It was a physical blow. The medical checks, the careful immobilization, the very chair she had adapted for him, the shared vulnerability over David's mortgage. It had all been a lie, a game. She had been played for a fool, her training and her empathy weaponized against her. As if sensing her cold fury, Cooper lifted his head, letting out a soft, sleepy yawn. He padded past her into the living room. He saw Sarah, a rigid statue of disbelief. Then he saw Mark standing by the window. The dog's brain processed the scene. His new friend was standing. The sad, quiet man was up and walking. This was wonderful. A low, excited rumble started in his chest. His tail gave a single, hesitant wag, then another, gathering speed. He trotted forward, his claws clicking on the floor, and nudged Mark's leg, looking up expectantly. Sarah watched the dog's pure, uncomplicated joy. Cooper, wagging his tail at the very lie that was shattering her, was a second, deeper betrayal. It was a mockery of the trust she thought they had all shared. Before she could speak, before she could unleash the cold rage building in her throat, the dawn broke, gray and frigid. She hadn't slept. She was sitting at the kitchen table, her hands wrapped around a cold mug, when a new sound began. It was a deep, rhythmic beating that rattled the glasses in the cupboard. Cooper ran to the window, barking, not in fear, but at the sheer intrusion. A sleek, black helicopter descended from the low clouds, its rotor wash blasting the fresh snow into a blinding vortex. It settled in the clearing David had always kept. The side door slid open. A woman emerged, stepping onto the snow in boots that cost more than Sarah's truck. This was Chloe. She was tall, impossibly elegant, and her face was a mask of cold impatience. She stomped toward the cabin, ignoring the dog barking behind the glass. "Mark!" she snapped, spotting him through the window. "Stop this childish, pathetic game now. We have a board meeting in Chicago." She saw Sarah and dismissed her with a single, insulting glance. She grabbed Mark's arm, her grip tight and aggressive. "I am not leaving without you." But she had miscalculated. In that instant, Cooper no longer saw a game. He saw a threat. He did not see a fiancé. He saw an aggressive stranger attacking a member of his pack. A deep, menacing growl erupted from his chest. He launched himself from the window, planting his body squarely between Mark and Chloe, his teeth bared and the fur on his back rigid. Chloe stumbled back, genuinely terrified. Mark stared at the dog, this animal who had trusted his feigned sorrow and was now defending him from his real one. He looked at Chloe's ugly, contorted face. Then he looked at Sarah, standing by the door, her expression shattered. "No," Mark said, his voice quiet but firm. "I'm not going with you." The thrumming beat of the helicopter faded, swallowed by the vast, indifferent sky. Silence, sharp and absolute, rushed back into the clearing. Mark stood alone, a figure of expensive clothes looking lost and small. Cooper, sensing the immediate threat was gone, let out a low, confused whine, his gaze shifting between the two humans. Sarah remained at the kitchen table, her body rigid, her hands wrapped around a mug that had long gone cold. The numbness of the initial shock had receded, replaced by a cold, precise rage. "Sarah," Mark began, taking a hesitant step toward the cabin. "Don't," she said. Her voice was flat, clinical, devoid of all emotion. She was right. The performance is over. "It wasn't a performance," he pleaded, his voice cracking. "The fall was real. The argument, that was real. When you found me and you said, 'spinal injury,' I saw a way out, a way to be gone just for a few days. I am suffocating, Sarah." "So you took this place," she said, her voice like ice, "my home, and you turned it into a stage for your rich man's crisis. You let me treat you. You let me talk about David. You let me open this wound, while you were perfectly fine." She stood up then, her control finally breaking, and pointed a trembling finger at the dog. But him, that was the worst part. He trusted you. He felt your pathetic self-pity and mistook it for real pain. His trust is the only clean, honest thing in this house besides the snow, and you corrupted it. You turned my dog into a fool. I'm sorry, he whispered. I want you gone. He nodded, defeated. He pulled a small, sleek satellite phone from his pocket, an object that screamed of the world he came from. Less than an hour later, a second, smaller helicopter arrived. He tried to speak one last time, but Sarah had turned her back, her face to the fire. He boarded, and she listened as the sound of the engine receded, leaving her in a silence that felt dirtier and emptier than the grief she had known before. Days passed, the storm broke, the plows finally came through. Sarah was outside splitting wood, the physical act a desperate attempt to sweat the contamination of the lie from her system, when she saw Cooper. He was ecstatic, tossing something bright red into the air and pouncing on it. It was a new toy, a heavy-duty, indestructible rubber ball. She recognized it instantly from a catalog she'd been browsing months ago. A toy Cooper had whined for, a toy she could not afford. Mark had left it, a guilt payment, a tip, a toy for the Helps dog. Later that day, the mail truck made its first run up the cleared mountain road. Among the junk mail was a thick, formal envelope from the bank. Her stomach tightened. This was it, the final foreclosure notice on David's mortgage. Her hand shook as she tore it open. She read the first line. And again, it wasn't a foreclosure notice, it was a statement. We are pleased to inform you that the outstanding mortgage on your property has been paid in full by a third-party benefactor. The letter fell from her numb fingers. The rage that filled her now was hot, acidic, and suffocating. He hadn't just lied. He hadn't just apologized with a toy. He had erased her. He had taken her struggle, her private, painful, daily fight to keep David's home, and had swatted it away like it was nothing. An inconvenience he could fix with a wire transfer. He had reduced her life, her grief, and David's memory to a transaction. The snow did not retreat. It surrendered. Weeks passed, and the brutal, silent white of the Keweenaw winter gave way to the messy, muddy symphony of spring. The air was filled with a new sound, not the scream of the wind, but the constant, gentle dripping of water from the eaves, a sound like a clock ticking life forward. Sarah's anger, however, had been slower to melt. The bank letter sat in a drawer, a constant, humiliating reminder. She hated him for the arrogance of it. And yet, for the first time in 2 years, the crushing, suffocating weight of David's mortgage was gone. She was angry, but she was also, confusingly, free. Cooper, meanwhile, had no such conflict. He adored his indestructible red ball. It was a new, joyful punctuation in their quiet lives, a flash of garish color against the brown, thawing earth. She was on the porch watching Cooper chase the ball in the mud when she heard an engine. It wasn't a helicopter. It was the strained, rattling sound of an old engine fighting its way up the steep gravel road. A rusty blue pickup truck, older than her own, pulled into the clearing and stopped. Cooper stopped playing, the ball dropping from his mouth. He stood stiffly by the porch, a low rumble in his chest, watching. The driver's door creaked open. Mark emerged. This wasn't the man from the helicopter. He wore faded jeans, heavy work boots, and a simple flannel shirt. He looked tired, nervous, and utterly real. He held up his hand slowly, a gesture of peace. "Sarah," he said, his voice quiet, "please don't send me away. I need to explain." She said nothing, her arms crossed, a wall of ice. "The bank," he said quickly, the words rehearsed. "They were going to take this place. They were going to take David's home. I couldn't let them, so I stopped them. It's done. The land is yours. I didn't give you anything, Sarah. I just made sure they couldn't take anything more from you." He looked at the ground, then back at her. "That's the truth, but it's It's not the only reason I came back." He looked past her, at the gray and white dog watching him with those intense, mismatched eyes. "I came back," Mark said, his voice breaking, "to apologize to Cooper." The name hung in the air. Cooper's head tilted. He let out a low, agonizing sound, not a growl, but a high-pitched whine of pure, confused joy. "Cooper," Mark said again, his voice thick. That was all it took. The dog exploded from Sarah's side, scrambling through the mud. He didn't bark, he cried, a series of happy yelps, and launched himself at Mark. Mark knelt just in time, bracing himself as the dog hit his chest, licking his face, his tail a gray blur. "I'm sorry, boy," Mark whispered, burying his face in the dog's thick fur. Cooper wriggled free, ran back to the porch, snatched the red ball, and ran back, dropping the slobber-covered toy directly into Mark's hand. He backed up and let out a single, sharp bark, a clear invitation to play. Sarah watched the scene. She watched this pure, uncomplicated forgiveness. The dog held no grudge. He didn't care about the lie. He only remembered the connection, the knot of pride and anger in her own chest, which she had held on to so tightly, finally unraveled. A long, shuddering breath left her lungs. It was the sound of a 2-year winter finally breaking. She looked at Mark, kneeling in the mud, a billionaire looking like a relieved kid. "You're covered in mud," she said. Her voice was rough. "You should probably come inside." She turned toward the door. "I just made coffee." This story is a powerful reminder that pride can build walls that even the truth can't tear down. Sometimes it takes a loyalty that is simple, pure, and four-legged to help us finally thaw. Cooper didn't see a lie or a billionaire. He just saw his friend. He showed us that forgiveness can be as simple as dropping a ball at someone's feet. If this story of healing resonated with you, we would be so honored if you shared it with someone who understands that kind of bond. We read every single comment and would love to hear your thoughts on Sarah's journey. Your support helps us tell more stories like this, and our newest one is ready and waiting for you now. Just click the video that has appeared on your screen.